Well, thank you, everybody. It's always great to get involved with ILSI. Really sorry I couldn't be there. I look forward to it in the future. A number of people can't that I'm just wandering around, it seems. But really, the key for me is looking at supply chain disruptions. And usually those disruptions are non-traditional. We look at food safety and things like E. coli uh, the same ways, in general compared to anything in the world. But all of a sudden, when you look at food defense, food fraud, those are human adversaries, and cybersecurity is the same way. It's just something the bad guys are doing to try to disrupt our lives. So that's why it makes sense for me to pursue this. So I'm going to think about the audience here. So you're either food safety managers for a company. It could be even the presenters before, a director of a food economic center, director of a food safety center. So I'm gonna target this at you to make it very, very practical. And the key is there's cybersecurity in the role for you as a manager, as a non-IT, non-cybersecurity manager. If you have any questions, everything is considered public here, so use it any way you want. We've shared a lot of this information around. So actually, I'm starting my timer so I know exactly where I am. Sorry to do that. Or I go on for 4 hours. So first off, one thing we're doing is putting this all together into easily accessible resources. So right now, this is a chapter that's still being developed. So if you've got some comments, if you like what you heard, if you didn't like what you heard, if there's more you want to see or hear, feel free to get on there. It's just a Google Doc, so you can make any comments. You can see the comments that other people have put out. That's going to be an open source book eventually. So what do you need to do? I like to get down to these really, really specific questions. So again, I'm thinking of, again, even the previous presenters to say, okay, cybersecurity, you've got plenty going on. You've got grants to pursue. You've got a lot of activity. So we're going to look at it from the point of you just managing, but also compliance. Food safety management systems, food laws, corporate requirements, enterprise requirements. So first off, as a food company, is looking at preventative controls. FSMA is the big driver there, especially in the US. And if you look there, it says since September 2016, hazard analysis must be written regardless of its outcome. So cybersecurity a cyber attack has a chance to disrupt your operations. Let's say it changes a recipe, changes lab tests, things like that. So it is a hazard, but is that really covered under FSMA or not? And that's a good question. So is it explicit or implicit in there? The key is it's a hazard, and so it must be assessed. That's the bottom line. So now it doesn't help us too much, but it's a starting point. So it's not explicitly in there. Let's look at the GFSI. So GFSI, the benchmark here, the food safety management system, this is the base for, or the reference for the food safety management systems you're familiar with, BRC, FSSC, SQF, IFS. And when we look through here, is cybersecurity implicit or explicit or implicit? When we look at keyword search, cyber zero, internet search, internet zero, information technology zero, no, but the question is, are there no cybersecurity requirements? Well, under food defense, it does say all forms of intentional malicious attack. So all forms does include everything. So cybersecurity would be in there. How do we deal with it? Because that's so different from physical security, someone entering the plant and throwing glass shards in a tank. Food safety. So food safety, it is really implicit in there as well, because we're looking at the problems to any product, anything that will cause an adverse health effect. So again, it might seem very, very out of the ordinary or very, very low likelihood, but still it's in there. And HACCP as well. HACCP is great for looking at, identify, evaluate, and controls and monitor those hazards. And so the HACCP is really inside the operations and things that can be adjusted inside the operations, and really significant health problems in the operation. So it's really, cybersecurity would be a prerequisite program. Corporate or customer requirements. So I've been working with a couple companies, and they have in their supplier agreements cybersecurity and information technology standards. And there's a number of programs that judge it, and it might be like no one can be below a level B for it as an acceptable supplier. So that's usually in there. And so if you haven't been looking at your supplier agreements, you may be looking at the food safety standards and systems, but is it's probably in there. So, and if you're a university, so University of Maryland, previous speaker, there may be additional requirements that your university has because of international activity. So beyond things like basic food safety or other things, there could be others activities you must conduct or that are applied to you. But what's the problem? What are the requirements for your company, and what are the requirements for you as a food safety manager? So this partially my focus came because working in food safety groups, cybersecurity was an issue, and the food safety managers kept saying, "We need to do something. We need to do something." And I kept feeling like, no, well, yeah, okay, something, but you're not an expert in cyber, just like the cyber people aren't experts in food safety. So that's where we kept digging in to say specifically, you as a center manager or you as a food safety manager, what is your role? So let's look a little bit of background. I think it's interesting is I now am in the Department of Supply Chain Management in the Business College. So my job is to teach Introduction to Supply Chain Management, which is great because I cover every topic. And partially I was put into this role to figure out how food fraud, food safety, food defense fits into a general supply chain management context. It's been difficult. And cybersecurity fits in there as well. So part of that is we look at cybersecurity, we look at the basics to build up the students' knowledge. So I'll give you a real brief background here. So to remind you, high-profile incidents. So it's getting a little while back was SolarWinds. So that was malware that allowed software access. It was a computer router. So you hook up to Wi-Fi and someone else can look at it. That's not good. So, and especially when that was in government operations. Colonial Pipeline, remember that? That was last summer, well, it's summer now. Last summer, the company went down with the pipelines for gasoline. So the entire eastern seaboard of the U.S. had limited gasoline fuel supply. It was ransomware, and they proactively shut down their entire system. It happened to be in like a back office human resources system that was accessed, but they didn't know how far the outbreak had occurred. JBS, so big food company, they had ransomware that encrypted their server. So it got part of their system, not in the operations, but still a part of their system got shut down. And they then had to shut down their company because they were worried about what else could be impacted. Genome information, cyber theft. So you just heard a previous speaker talking about whole genome sequencing. There's a lot of costs and research and time, and then a cybersecurity threat could lead someone to be able to come in and just steal all that valuable information. Now there were several incidents that led to potential public health threats, and one was this water authority had remote access to one of their systems, which controlled the amount of lye going into drinking water. Now fortunately they found that well before the time that it went into the marketplace, but still there's an example of something that could happen. The thought is that the cyber hacker got in the system to try to find something to disrupt. They didn't specifically look at impacting public health, but they could have. Maricold Logistics. So this is ransomware again. So basically they shut down the servers to have someone pay them in Bitcoin, but this was a cold service company. So things do happen in the food industry. But is the target a company or industry or their money? And that's a real key. The cyber hackers, they want Bitcoin. So this is more of a fraud criminal act than a food defense act. The intent for harm hasn't shown up in the incidents that we've seen. Now that doesn't mean that it couldn't happen, but I mean, a focus here is that we focus on cybersecurity, protecting your own system, and more of the attacks are going to be ransomware. And so if we shut down those, we also then shut down the more deeper problems as well. And the target really is industry. They call it a spray and pray. The money, they send out 1,000 spam emails, a couple of them pop up. And if the couple pop up at a food company, that's just what it is. Topic and pressure. Also, FDA is looking at some different things in the area of e-commerce and cybersecurity. They had a New Era in Starter Food Safety had a public meeting about B2C, business to consumer delivery. So that's food safety hazards from things like DoorDash or shipping food from restaurants mainly. So that's kind of cybersecurity. Looked at meal kits, things like that. But wait, is that cybersecurity or e-commerce or both? So now we're sorry, I see that it restored, the audio was off for a second. So ISO 22000, let's look at the food safety standard there. This is what really led me to look at cybersecurity, because ISO 22000 does now include the word cybersecurity as a food safety problem. So ISO 22000, if you're not familiar, it builds on those basic concepts of ISO 9000 and 31000. There's a technical committee. I'm a voting member of that committee. It looks at food safety hazards. We're trying to reduce the hazards along the way. And then there's these new hazards in 2018, and that include food fraud, food defense, cybersecurity. It defines those as specifically included. And to get to ISO 22000 is actually the foundation for GFSI. There's a lot of different parts of that standard we won't go into, but the key is there's a lot of detail there, and that's a real key. There's a lot of detail in ISO. So when we look at the cybersecurity requirements in ISO 22000 is, we're looking at this, the scope includes anything that could lead to a food safety-based adverse health effect. So cyber would fall into that. They look at external and internal issues. So that JBS Holdings and Americold and others, those are external issues. Later, they talk about, they have a note that, and this is as much information as they have about food fraud and food defense and others, but note there it says cybersecurity and food fraud. So we then looked at that specifically to start as from the food safety or food fraud standpoint, is that cybersecurity and food fraud together, or are they separate? I think what was really intended there was e-commerce related to food fraud, but bottom line, it says cybersecurity. So we need to look at cybersecurity because it says that it's right there. The exact word is in the food safety management system. So let's look here again. So how formal or direct are the cybersecurity requirements? There are no further details or explicit compliance requirements, other than it just says it does include cybersecurity. ISO 22000 does not have a definition of cybersecurity, but that doesn't hinder us yet. There's other ISO standards we can look at to see what they might mean in the bigger ISO context, and one is ISO 28000 supply chain security. So most food companies are compliant with this. You might not know since it might be in your logistics group or others, or something like ISO 28000. Doesn't even mention cyber, but that also is not a surprise because this was about a 2008 standard that was just updated or just reviewed, but cyber was not really a hot topic then. Again, the GFSI document does not mention cybersecurity. So again, ignore it or not. So that's a good question. You'd say, if asking the direct question, should you ignore it or not? Well, no, but the question is about resources, time, money. What's the biggest priority for you to work on and your team to work on today? So let's keep going. We're going to look at insight from where cybersecurity is mentioned, other parts of ISO. So we're going to use ISO itself to define the ISO 22000 issue. So when we look at that, it was really great to find a ISO standard on cybersecurity, 27032, and we'll look at the foundations before that. So first is NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. This is a U.S. Department of Commerce group. It really sets measurements and standards for federal computer systems. Now, it happens that the federal government in the U.S. is very big, and so a lot of these become really standard across all of industry. They do have a cybersecurity framework. So again, you're a food safety person, you know about HACCP and things like that. You don't know about things like the cybersecurity framework. That's okay, but the key is there is this overall concept. They have other reports and details, cybersecurity handbook for managers, information security management. So there is a lot of work in this area. It is a true science, a true area of study. There's more on the way. And in parallel to NIST is ISO 27000 is information security management, and information is on a computer, and people access the computer to get to that issue. So cyber falls under 27000. And in this series, it talks about a management system. That's very similar to us as well. We're familiar to that with HACCP is a management system, and they have these specific guidelines for cybersecurity. They define information security incident management. So again, just like we have food safety management, they have their own ways to look at these entire networks and systems. And there's specific requirements in there. And the key is looking at establishing that security within the context of the organization. What's important about that is, so let's say you're a peanut farmer versus a meat ready-to-eat meat company. You have very different requirements for food safety. That's the same that they're applying here in ISO 27000. Based on your business, within the context of your organization, you have different requirements. They change quite a bit because you're a different type of target. So when we look at ISO 27032, if you know anything about me, you know I love definitions. Always want to start at the base so we know what we're talking about. We can get in the common terminology. So they do define cybersecurity, then thus cyberspace. So different than cybersecurity. So protecting information in the cyberspace. Cyberspace is the work that you're working on, more like your own connections with companies is your cyberspace. Then there's internet, and there's the internet. So it does seem kind of silly to have to define these basic terms we think we all know, but again, just explaining that clearly, internet is that connected network. The internet is the global network, all in the public domain. Key there is public domain, a lot of activity out there. And then we look at internet security versus cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is protecting your systems and your information. That's very internally focused. Internet security is farther out there in the rest of the world. That might be similar to looking at food safety, protecting yourself, and food security, you know, having enough food for everybody else, but we're looking at what's inside and outside. So cybersecurity is very inside. Then the virtual world is just out there, everything that's going on, the entire world. Just in general, there are definitions. E-commerce is specifically only the interaction of business online. So that's within cyberspace, but we're now defining what we're looking at and what's under our control. And that the key is there's looking at cybersecurity as our focus here, protecting you and your systems from being attacked or them modifying your food to lead to a food safety hazard. So ISO 27032, the details. We're now getting down to it because we want to see what's the direction from ISO for us. What are we supposed to do as a food safety manager? You're not the IT manager for your company. You're not the CFO. You're not the CEO. So the guidelines are very specific there. Is emphasis on collaboration. It's not your job, or it's not just IT's job to address cybersecurity. And what we're looking at is different things: information security, network security, internet security, so people operating out on the real world, and critical information infrastructure. And that's a CIIP compared to CIP, which is what we look at from the food industry. We look at our, food as a critical infrastructure. So overall, the IT group is looking at a lot of different things. You only have a small role here, like information security. Your role is not to protect the human resources documents for your employees in the food safety group. You have specific information, such as lab tests, such as other details, some history, things like that, approvals, and internet security is you interacting with whatever that supplier is. So within the overall context of your company, you have specific requirements. And just a note is critical information infrastructure protection and critical infrastructure protection. Critical information would be things like those lab tests or approvals or releases, things like that. Critical infrastructure would be your operations equipment, such as a metal detector. So if you're not an expert in IT or cybersecurity, and they're not an expert in food safety and the food manufacturing operations, the key is what do you do? So that's why you need to collaborate. As a food safety manager, as a center director, your role is to let the cybersecurity group know what your concerns are. If there's a research group, if there's type of information that's especially sensitive, to let them know what they should be looking for. Think about it like going to a doctor, medical doctor. So your doctor, you don't expect you to be an expert in brain cancer, liver cancer, and broken legs. And you don't expect your medical doctor to be an expert in all those areas. You expect them to be a generalist. So you, as a food safety manager, go to your doctor, your IT group, and tell them what you think is wrong. They do the interpretation to figure, oh, you have brain cancer, liver cancer, or a broken leg. That's exactly the same situation here where you're looking for them to help. This also goes into looking at prioritizing the risks. This is where the role really comes into the food safety manager or the center director. And overall, enterprise risk management is something we've talked about for 10 years probably. It's really getting implemented into the business and into governments as well, and even in universities in some cases. Is a risk tolerance. How much is enough? You do let people use cell phones. You do let people have laptops. That's then within your risk tolerance to some level. So with food safety, the key is identifying those risks, impacts, and exposure. And then there's a template. Fortunately, there's a template from NIST and ISO 27000 that we can use to present to our IT and cybersecurity managers. And the key is use the forms and documents and terminology that they're familiar with. So when you fill this out, then and you address your concerns, they know exactly what you're talking about, and they have ways that they can organize it. You as a patient, let's go back to you being the patient. You go to your doctor and your doctor says, don't worry about your knee, you're going to be fine. Well, my knee hurts a lot and I've been limping and I want to go run. That's not acceptable for me to just say rest on it and wait. I go back to my doctor and I say something's wrong, I want it fixed. I'm not convinced that I'm healthy. That's the same thing that you do in food safety, talking to cybersecurity. So here's the NIST notional cybersecurity risk register template. And the key there is in the red, what you would fill in. Again, it could be specific products that are of concern, the risk category being public health, could be a recipe, could be sensitive research that you have moving forward, could be things like when you're doing new product development. You don't want to let that get into the marketplace. That could be, cyber industrial espionage. So this is the part that we fill in, and when you present this to them, then the IT and the cybersecurity group is going to be familiar with this form and this template, and they're going to then be able to really apply their expertise. When we're looking at this is very, very basic is prioritizing. So we're looking at the steps to review those food safety vulnerabilities from cybersecurity concerns. And how we do this is first, if you're doing this by yourself or with them, create a map of your manufacturing operations. So you need to first understand what you do. So you probably have that. It's the design of the plant, or again, your supply chain of where you get your product. Tier 1, 2, 3 suppliers upstream. You're doing traceability. Downstream are echelons all the way to the consumer. You've got this overlay of the supply chain map. At that point, then you can identify the systems or steps that are IT intensive or automated systems. So a big question is things like a metal detector, or it could be a temperature of a refrigerator or of an oven. One situation we were in is there's an automated system, and the food safety manager said they get alerts when the refrigerator or the oven is out of compliance. But that's an IT intensive or automated system, but they also had a manual backup. So if they didn't get the alert right now, within a minute of that fluctuation, then it's every hour or every 2 hours, someone manually goes around and checks all the temperature gauges. So in that case, they've identified their supply chain map, their operations. They've identified the IT intensive systems, but that's a low risk, a low consequence, a low likelihood of it lasting very long because they're already doing those manual checks. That's why we map this. Now, if there's a situation where you don't do the manual checks, then that would be a red zone concern. Then review with IT, the IT automation, cyber and network incidents, system weaknesses, or concerns. So you look at things like JBS or Americold or other type of issues. Look at problems you've had when your system has crashed, or when someone didn't have access, or a computer at the back of the plant didn't get the Norton antivirus updated or whatever. List your incidents. Now you know what specifically you're looking at. These are the highest priorities because these are things that have happened. That have happened to you. So that's a way to look at basically starting to have a lot of good information to collaborate with cyber and IT security, so you can start to talk about these real problems. So to boil it down one step further to call to action. So from the ISO 27000 and 27032, which was cybersecurity, the conclusion for the food safety manager, number one is you are not accountable or responsible for conducting cybersecurity assessments or selecting, implementing, and managing those systems. That might sound completely logical, but there were a lot of people that were starting to look at these and developing them for themselves. So the key is you shouldn't be doing that, because let's say that you're part of your organization that takes credit cards. There's a lot of different type of cyber vulnerabilities there, and they may learn 10 times more than you know. So we want to apply the best practices from there in your systems. Most likely with food safety, we're going to be lower in those overall types of threats than the other places. We want to take the best practices. You're accountable for sharing your expert functional area insight on critical infrastructure protection to IT people and assuring your systems are covered. So if you're a food safety manager, you're accountable for maintaining and receiving that food safety management system certification, again, such as BRC, FSSC, whatever. And so you're critical to assuring that part of it, the cybersecurity part of it, is addressed. Also think about you as a patient. Do you feel okay? And if the doctor says just don't worry about it, just you're going to be a little tired, you're getting old, that's not acceptable. So you need to be looking at your system and be the advocate for the food safety system. You are accountable to make sure you are meeting the FSMA and GFSI requirements and for considering all hazards, including those of cybersecurity and e-commerce. So the bottom line, you are required to assess those and address them, but only in the context of those certifications or the direction from your company. So use those cybersecurity teams, ask for an audit, list your potential concerns, and then that's your role of being a good patient. So takeaway points, call to action. Should go without saying to support your team, updating and complying with all IT security. At minimum, do not complain. I do it all the time. Like, oh, it's backing up. I've got to wait. I've got to do this. Well, no. Number one is be positive about that because that protects everything. And if you downplay it, if you make it less of a priority, they will as well. Ask for an IT audit. That's the best way to start. Have them come in and look at your systems. They're experts in the systems. They might find that odd computer that's not registered or not updating properly. Confirm your company's cybersecurity system meets the food safety management system requirement. Very little is there, but at least you've got that to look at. I think that's a real key. And finally, document the food safety critical infrastructure protection. That's looking at your supply chain, where there are those IT systems, and then make sure that they're protected. So with that, I'd say thank you very much. Actually, my clock is saying I've got 2 seconds there. So I'll give me a pat on the back for that. So thank you, and would love to take any questions. Feel free, please comment on the paper. We're trying to make that to be effective, and that will also be a public document. We'll have that posted for free once it's edited. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Spink. That broad overview with a lot of very specific guidance and recommendations, I think quite useful. So we open up the floor for questions or comments, improvements in the approach. So maybe I'll start with one question myself. Professor, so you talked a lot about kind of step one, risk management. Go and talk to your IT department. So sometimes my little home office, I get sent to my IT department, which happens to be me also.
Yeah.
So in my part of the world, in Southeast Asia, we have a lot of SMEs, so a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, but even in the US as well. So they may not have an IT department. So how can they deal with some of these issues if the first step for them is not going to their IT department?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and the key is to start in with a very practical approach. I will say, you as an individual is to here in the U.S. we have Best Buy Geek Squad, so you have your local IT person, whoever takes care of your computers, and go to them and ask what you should do. And a key there is Department of Homeland Security even says for the small and medium-sized businesses is that if you use something like Microsoft Office in the Office suite, and you use that for email and Outlook, then if that product, if your information is stored on their cloud drive, you're relying on the best, biggest IT corporations of how they protect themselves to protect you. Now, it could be Microsoft, could be iCloud, could be OneDrive, could be whoever. But the key is using if you're storing, so I say personally, if you're using those systems and you have your information stored on the cloud there, then someone could lock up your computer and it doesn't matter. Everything you have is backed up on the cloud. So again, I could walk right up to you and steal your laptop off your desk and you'd lose nothing. So right there is a way to look at cybersecurity. The same thing goes for the small and medium-sized companies, especially if they have an association or a group, to just start to look at the central systems that they use. And then those systems will protect the data. Ransomware, as you saw, was the biggest IT hack. Specifically, cybersecurity is the attacks. It's not you being not wise. So at one point in the past, I did have Norton antivirus, but I updated it. I ran it every day, but I didn't do the live update. So I never got any updates. So I had 1,200 of little viruses on my computer. I wasn't being proficient about the background. So to take back is you yourself have a good antivirus software and talk to an IT person that helps manage your laptop, and you identify your concern, mostly being ransomware. And then for small and medium companies as well, is really the same ideas. Protect your computers, which protects your information systems. Did that seem uh, satisfying as a response?
Yes,
A little.
within, within the known limits. I think that's, I mean, it's good sound basic advice, like, eating an apple a day and getting an hour of physical activity every day. That's so so yeah. Having basic cybersecurity steps and maybe VPN and like you say, backing up in the cloud and getting a good IT advisor. So that's.
See, that's it. And the thing is, people think about terrorist attacks, controlling your systems and things like that. The most basic systems are the things at the start, and they're thing again. If you use even if a company just uses an antivirus software, then the thing there is it's going to recommend changing passwords and things like that. So that's the place to start. And again, if you do have big concerns as a food safety manager, your job is not to implement those systems. Your job is to go ask IT or ask the president of the company, and that's the starting point.